There is a particular kind of suffering that no one talks about, the suffering of the person who never says no, who swallows their words before they can cause discomfort, who smiles when they should speak, who apologizes when they have done nothing wrong. It is a quiet suffering, invisible to the world, because from the outside this person appears kind, agreeable, even admirable. But inside, something corrodes slowly. A feeling grows that cannot be named easily, the feeling of being used, overlooked, and somehow less than everyone around you. And the most devastating part is this: you did it to yourself, not through weakness of character, but through an excess of something the world told you was a virtue. Niccolo Machiavelli, the Florentine diplomat who studied power not as an abstraction, but as a living, breathing force in human affairs, understood something that most people spend their entire lives refusing to accept. He observed courts, princes, and common men with the cold clarity of a physician examining a wound, and what he found was this: goodness without strategy is not goodness at all. It is an invitation. It is an open door left unguarded in a city that has never known peace. The world does not reward the person who causes the least friction. The world advances toward the person who knows when to yield, and far more importantly, when to hold absolutely still. Think about the moments in your own life when you said yes and meant no. Think about the meetings where your ideas were spoken by someone else and received with applause while you sat in silence. Think about the relationships where you gave endlessly and received gratitude that felt more like a transaction than a truth. Now ask yourself, with the honesty that only solitude permits, how long have you been confusing politeness with peace? Because they are not the same thing. Politeness can be a mask worn so long that the person underneath forgets what their real face looks like. And the tragedy is not that others took advantage of your kindness. The tragedy is that you never gave them a reason not to. Machiavelli wrote that a prince who relies entirely on the goodwill of others builds on sand, not because the world is populated by villains, but because human nature, observed without romantic illusion, responds to perceived strength. People, consciously or not, test the boundaries of those around them. They push softly at first, and when nothing pushes back, they push harder. This is not cruelty, this is human. And the person who has never learned to push back does not earn respect through their generosity. They earn something far more corrosive. They earn invisibility. What you are about to hear is not a lesson in becoming cold, ruthless, or calculating. This is not an invitation to abandon your humanity. It is something far more rare and far more necessary. It is an education in dignity. Machiavelli did not admire tyrants for their cruelty. He admired them for their clarity. He admired the person who understood that to protect what matters, you must sometimes be willing to disturb what is comfortable. If you have spent your life being too polite, too accommodating, too careful not to upset anyone, then stay, because what follows will change the way you see yourself, the way you see others, and the way you move through a world that has been waiting for you to finally arrive. Machiavelli opened his most enduring work not with philosophy, but with observation. The observation that men are governed more by appearances than by realities. This single insight contains within it the entire architecture of why excessive politeness destroys a person's standing in the world. When you are unfailingly polite, when you never raise your voice, never draw a clear line, never allow your displeasure to surface, you create an appearance, and that appearance is not kindness. That appearance is availability. You become, in the eyes of the world, someone without edges, and a person without edges can be shaped into whatever form is most convenient for others. The excessively polite person usually developed their behavior for understandable reasons. Perhaps in childhood, conflict carried a cost too high to risk. Perhaps approval was the currency of safety, and disagreement meant isolation. The politeness was not a flaw in those early years. It was a strategy, and for a time it worked. But strategies designed for one environment become liabilities when the environment changes. The child who learned to be invisible to survive becomes the adult who cannot be seen even when they desperately need to be. What protected you once is now the very cage you cannot name. Machiavelli observed that the prince who is too generous, too eager to please, inevitably exhausts his resources and his respect simultaneously. He gives until others expect his giving as a natural right rather than a gift. And at that moment, something irreversible happens. Gratitude transforms into entitlement. The people around the excessively polite person are not monsters for this transformation. They are simply responding to the law of normalization. When someone always says yes, yes becomes the expectation. When someone never expresses a need, having no needs becomes their assumed condition. You trained the people in your life to treat you this way, and the painful part is that you did it one small capitulation at a time. There is a particular kind of exhaustion that comes from chronic over-politeness, and it is different from ordinary tiredness. It lives in the body differently. It presents as a heaviness in social situations, a quiet dread before interactions that should be neutral, a strange resentment that appears without an obvious trigger. Machiavelli would recognize this immediately. It is the exhaustion of a person performing a role they did not choose, maintaining a mask that was supposed to be temporary, using energy every single day to suppress the truths they were never permitted to speak. The body keeps the score of every swallowed word. What makes this pattern so insidious is that it often exists beneath a surface that looks like moral superiority. The excessively polite person tells themselves a story, that they are kind, that they are mature, that they rise above pettiness while others descend into it. And there is enough truth in that story to make it believable. But Machiavelli's lens cuts through comfortable self-narratives with surgical precision. He asks not what a man believes about himself, but what the results of his behavior reveal about his true position in the world. And the results in this case are consistent. The overly polite person is not elevated by their politeness. They are reduced by it. The reduction happens gradually, and then suddenly. It happens in the meeting where someone speaks over you and no one notices, because interrupting you has never had consequences. It happens in the friendship where your discomfort is never considered because you have never made your discomfort visible. It happens in the negotiation where you accept less than you deserve because you cannot tolerate the tension of asking for more. Each instance seems small. Each instance seems manageable, but they accumulate into a reality in which the world has quietly agreed, without ever meeting to discuss it, that your preferences are negotiable and your limits do not exist. Machiavelli's remedy begins not with aggression, but with awareness. Before a person can change their relationship with power, they must first see clearly the relationship they currently inhabit, and that requires a moment of genuine honesty that most people avoid precisely because it is uncomfortable. The moment when you stop calling your compliance by flattering names and see it plainly for what it is. Not kindness, not wisdom, not peace, but fear wearing the coat of virtue, moving through the world, hoping not to be disturbed, and paying a price for that hope in daily installments of invisible suffering. Machiavelli was not a cynic about human nature in the way his reputation suggests. He was, more precisely, a realist. A man who loved his city deeply enough to write about it without the comfort of illusions. And his realism produced one of the most counterintuitive insights in the entire history of political thought. That being feared is often safer than being loved, not because fear is preferable in some abstract moral sense, but because fear is consistent and love is conditional. Those who love you may abandon you when it becomes inconvenient. Those who understand your capacity to hold your ground never entirely forget it. In the context of daily human relationships, this does not mean cultivating intimidation or menace. It means something far more subtle and far more achievable, cultivating the reputation of someone who cannot be manipulated without consequence. Machiavelli studied men who held power not primarily through violence, but through the perception of solidity. They were people of whom others said, without quite knowing why, "I would not want to test that person." Not because they were cruel, but because they radiated a quality that the Florentine recognized as fundamental to survival in a complex world. They were entirely present to themselves. They occupied their own reality without apology. Respect, understood through this lens, is not given as a reward for good behavior. It is not something accumulated through years of deference and accommodation. Respect, in the Machiavellian framework, is a response to the recognition of boundaries. When a person demonstrates through their behavior that certain things are simply not possible with them, something changes in the people around them. It is subtle at first, a hesitation before an inappropriate request, a slight recalibration of tone, a moment of consideration that was absent before. These small shifts are the first signs that the world is beginning to adjust its understanding of who you are and what you will tolerate. The tragedy of the overly polite person is that they often interpret these first small shifts as conflict. And in their discomfort with conflict, they retreat back into accommodation. They mistake the slight friction of establishing a boundary for a rupture in the relationship, when in truth, that friction is the relationship becoming real for the first time. Machiavelli would say that a relationship without the possibility of friction is not a relationship at all. It is a performance. It is two people playing roles that were assigned without consent, maintained through habit, and never examined with clear eyes. Consider the nature of negotiations as Machiavelli understood them. Not only the formal kind conducted between states and princes, but the constant informal negotiations that constitute the texture of daily life. Every interaction contains within it a negotiation about value. When you defer immediately, when you yield before the other person has even fully pressed their case, you are not being generous. You are sending a signal about the value of your own position. You are communicating in the clearest possible language that what you want matters less than what they want. And once that communication has been received and internalized, it becomes extraordinarily difficult to revise. This is why Machiavelli insisted that the prince must establish his nature clearly and early. The effort required to change a perception already formed is 10 times greater than the effort required to form the right perception from the beginning. For those who have spent years in patterns of excessive accommodation, this truth carries both a challenge and a hope. The challenge is that recalibration takes sustained effort and carries temporary discomfort. The hope is that it is possible. Human perceptions are not permanent, and the person who begins to change their behavior consistently will find, within a shorter time than they expect, that the world's treatment of them begins to change correspondingly. The deepest teaching in this block is one that Machiavelli embedded in the very structure of his thought, the idea that respect cannot be requested, only commanded, not through force, but through the quiet authority of a person who knows their own value and acts accordingly. The overly polite person has been requesting respect for years, hoping that their accommodations would be recognized and reciprocated. They have been waiting for the world to notice their sacrifice and choose, out of appreciation, to treat them better. And the world, consistent with its nature, has continued to take the path of least resistance. It always will, until the request is replaced with a reality that cannot be ignored. To understand why people walk over the overly polite, it is necessary to understand not only the psychology of the victim of this dynamic, though victim is too strong and too static a word, but the psychology of those who take advantage of it. Machiavelli was clear-eyed about this. Most people who exploit the availability of others are not consciously malicious. They are opportunistic in the same way that water is opportunistic, flowing always to the lowest point, not because it chooses to, but because the path is open. Close the path, and the water finds another direction entirely. The person who consistently takes more than their share in a relationship, who always seems to receive more accommodation than they give, who occupies more space in every interaction, this person is usually not lying awake at night, planning their exploitation. They are simply responding to the information provided by the dynamic. The information says, this person's time is flexible. This person's preferences are adjustable. This person will not push back. And so they do not push back. Why would they? Every system optimizes toward the behaviors that work within it. If taking works, taking continues. Machiavelli observed in the courts of Europe that the most dangerous advisors were not the openly ambitious ones. Those could be watched, managed, kept in check. The most dangerous were those who cultivated an image of indispensability through a slow and patient process of becoming necessary. They made themselves useful in ways that could not easily be replaced, and in doing so, they accumulated a quiet power that the prince only noticed when it was already substantial. The person who exploits chronic kindness operates with a similar, if usually unconscious, logic. They become accustomed to the service, and the service provider becomes invisible as a person, recognized only as a function. There is something psychologically important in the word invisible, because the deeply polite person often believes that their kindness makes them liked. And in a surface sense, it may be true. People enjoy the presence of someone who causes no friction, asks for nothing, and accommodates everything. But there is a profound difference between being liked and being valued. Being liked means you are pleasant to be around. Being valued means your absence would create a genuine gap. The overly polite person is often deeply liked and profoundly undervalued, and the distinction is not subtle once it is seen clearly. Machiavelli wrote that a prince ought to have no aim or thought but war, meaning, more broadly, that a person of consequence ought to be deeply acquainted with the arena in which they operate and prepared to defend their position within it. Translated from the language of statecraft to the language of ordinary relationships, this means know the field. Know that every social environment has its own internal hierarchies, its own unspoken rules about who receives consideration and who gives it. The person who does not study these dynamics, who assumes that good faith will be met with good faith without strategic foundation, is the person who consistently finds themselves surprised by betrayal, exhaustion, and invisible diminishment. The exploitation of excessive politeness is also, in many cases, a form of unconscious testing. When someone asks too much, they are partly asking, will this person find their boundary? And when the boundary never appears, something important happens. Not only does the asking person take more, but they lose a measure of the respect they were partly hoping to be prevented from losing. There is a strange paradox here that Machiavelli would have recognized immediately. Some people need to encounter resistance to understand the value of what they have. The person who says yes to everything inadvertently teaches others that they themselves are not worth protecting. This block closes with a truth that is uncomfortable but essential. The people who walk over you are, in a very real sense, responding to your instructions. Not the instructions you spoke aloud, but the instructions communicated through 1,000 small acts of yielding. Changing the dynamic does not require confrontation, anger, or the dramatic declaration of new rules. It requires something quieter and more sustained, the gradual revision of the instructions, one interaction at a time. until the world receives a different signal and begins, slowly and inevitably, to respond differently. Machiavelli was not a philosopher of cruelty. He was a philosopher of effectiveness. And effectiveness, in human relationships as in statecraft, depends on understanding the difference between a boundary that is felt and one that is merely spoken. A spoken boundary without behavioral enforcement is not a boundary. It is a wish. It is an announcement made to no one in particular, easily forgotten, rarely respected, and ultimately more damaging than no announcement at all, because it establishes that your declarations carry no weight. A dignified boundary in the Machiavellian framework begins internally before it is ever expressed externally. It begins with the moment of self-recognition, the moment when a person understands clearly what they will and will not participate in, not because a book or a teacher told them, but because they have examined their own life with sufficient honesty to know what costs them their self-respect. This internal architecture is the foundation, and it is the part most commonly skipped. People attempt to establish external limits before they have done the harder work of deciding internally what genuinely matters to them and why. Without that foundation, the boundary collapses at the first sign of pressure. Machiavelli's prince understood that the timing of an action is as important as the action itself. A boundary established too late, in the heat of accumulated resentment, carries a different quality than one communicated with calm clarity at the appropriate moment. The person who finally explodes after years of silence is not establishing a boundary. They are releasing pressure. And pressure release, while temporarily cathartic, rarely produces the structural change that patient, consistent communication of limits produces. The world responds to patterns, not to eruptions. An eruption is forgotten. A consistent pattern is internalized. The language of dignified limits is not aggressive and not apologetic. Machiavelli would likely describe it as economical, using only the words necessary, carrying no more emotional charge than the situation requires, communicating with the clarity of someone who has nothing to prove because they are already entirely certain of their position. "This doesn't work for me" is a complete sentence. "I'm not available for that" requires no elaboration. "That isn't something I'm willing to do" needs no justification to someone who has not yet earned the right to understand the reasons. Explanation in excess communicates uncertainty, and uncertainty invites negotiation. One of the most important observations Machiavelli made about power is that it is largely a matter of perception before it is a matter of reality. This means that the person who carries themselves as though their time, energy, and attention are valuable will find that others begin treating those things as valuable, often before anything has concretely changed in their external circumstances. The internal shift precedes the external shift. The person who begins to believe, truly believe, in their bones, that their preferences deserve consideration will begin to communicate that belief in ways they are not even fully aware of. Their posture changes, their pace changes, the ease with which they can be interrupted changes. The world is remarkably sensitive to these signals. Boundaries also function, in the Machiavellian view, as acts of respect toward the relationship itself. When you say no to something that violates your values or exhausts your resources, you are not attacking the relationship. You are investing in its long-term integrity. Relationships built on one-sided accommodation are structurally unsound. They carry within them a resentment that grows silently until it either destroys the relationship from within or produces the kind of explosive ending that leaves everyone wondering what happened. The person who establishes honest limits early is not being selfish. They are being an architect, constructing something durable rather than something temporarily convenient. Finally, Machiavelli's deepest lesson on this subject is perhaps the most liberating. Not everyone will respond well to your limits, and that is not your failure. Some people in your life are present specifically because your limitlessness serves them. When the limitlessness ends, they may leave, and their leaving is not a punishment. It is a revelation. It reveals the nature of what the relationship actually was. The Florentine understood that the prince who tries to maintain the loyalty of everyone will maintain the loyalty of no one with any depth. The willingness to lose the people who were only ever using you is not a cost of developing dignity. It's among its greatest rewards. Machiavelli wrote that words are easy to come by and difficult to defend. He understood, as anyone who has spent time in environments where power is actively contested comes to understand, that the person who speaks most is not usually the person who holds most. There is a form of authority that lives in restraint, in the willingness to observe, to wait, to allow silence to do the work that 100 anxious words could never accomplish. The overly polite person often fills silence compulsively, rushing to smooth every discomfort, dissolve every tension, offer every reassurance. And in doing so, they hand away leverage they did not know they possessed. Silence, understood strategically rather than as absence or passivity, is one of the most powerful tools available to someone learning to reclaim their presence in relationships. When an unreasonable request is made and you respond with calm silence rather than immediate accommodation, something shifts in the room. The person who made the request must now sit with it. They must confront the possibility that what they asked for was not reasonable, that the response they expected, the immediate yes, the eager agreement, will not materialize. This is not manipulation. This is the natural consequence of being present rather than performing. The Florentine observed that the most effective princes were those who revealed less than they knew, promised less than they could deliver, and waited longer than their opponents could tolerate before committing to a position. This patience was not passivity, it was strategic intelligence. It was the recognition that the person who moves first, out of anxiety or eagerness to please, almost always concedes more than is necessary. The person who can wait, who can endure the discomfort of an unresolved tension without immediately acting to resolve it, operates from a position of strength that their more reactive counterpart can never quite access. For the chronically polite person, learning restraint feels initially like cruelty. It feels like withholding something the other person needs. This feeling must be examined carefully because it often reveals the deepest mechanism of the politeness pattern, the belief that other people's emotional comfort is your responsibility and that discomfort in others is a sign of your failure. Machiavelli would interrogate this belief with his characteristic precision. Is it true? Is another adult's ability to tolerate a moment of uncertainty actually your responsibility? Is their discomfort when you say no a proportionate measure of whether you have acted rightly? The answer, examined honestly, is no. But the body often takes longer to believe this than the mind does. Restraint also applies to the giving of explanations and justifications. The overly polite person tends toward over-explanation, offering elaborate reasons for their limits, preemptively defending their choices, seeking understanding before it has been requested. This comes from a deep place, the fear that without a compelling reason, the limit will not be accepted, or the person will be angry, or the relationship will be damaged. But Machiavelli's observation cuts through this fear with clarity. The more elaborate your justification, the more points of entry you create for the other person to argue with. A simple, calm position, held without excessive elaboration, is far harder to dismantle than a detailed defense that carries within it the seeds of negotiation. There is also the strategic value of unpredictability, not the false unpredictability of chaotic behavior, but the genuine unpredictability of a person who responds from internal truth rather than external pressure. Machiavelli noted that the prince who is entirely predictable becomes controllable. The person who can always be relied upon to accommodate, to agree, to defer, this person is not valued for their flexibility. They are managed for it. The moment someone can no longer predict with certainty how you will respond, the dynamic shifts. They must now consider you as a full agent in the interaction, rather than a known quantity that can be factored in without thought. Silence and restraint are not cold virtues. They are not the province of the closed off or the emotionally unavailable. They are, practiced with warmth and intention, the marks of a person who is deeply present, present enough to choose their responses, rather than simply react to whatever is placed in front of them. Machiavelli's ideal of the effective leader was not someone without feeling, but someone whose feeling did not control them, whose wisdom operated independently of their anxiety, whose dignity remained intact even under conditions designed to erode it. That kind of presence is not born. It is built in the daily practice of choosing stillness over compulsion, one quiet moment at a time. There is a fear that runs through the heart of everyone who begins this journey. The fear that in learning to hold their ground, they will become someone they do not recognize. Someone harder, someone colder, someone who in gaining power loses the warmth that was perhaps their truest quality. Machiavelli, for all his reputation as an advocate of ruthlessness, actually understood this fear deeply. He distinguished carefully between the prince who uses strength in service of genuine goals and the prince who becomes intoxicated by the exercise of strength itself. The first is effective. The second destroys themselves along with their enemies. Reclaiming your voice does not mean becoming loud. It means becoming honest. It means allowing what is true inside you to have a path to the surface. Not always, not recklessly, not without discernment, but reliably enough that the people in your life begin to understand that you are a complete person with genuine preferences, real limits, and an interior life that does not exist entirely for their convenience. This is not selfishness. This is the minimum condition for authentic relationship. You cannot truly connect with a person who is only ever performing for you, and the deeply polite person, in their exhausting accommodation of everyone, makes real connection structurally impossible. Machiavelli's deepest political insight was also his most personal one, that the man who does not know how to be feared will never know how to be loved. Not feared in the sense of terror, but in the sense of consequence. When there is no consequence to treating you poorly, there is no particular incentive to treat you well. Kindness offered without any underlying structure of self-respect is received not as a gift, but as a baseline, the floor below which no one expects to fall. Kindness offered by a person who also clearly has standards becomes something entirely different. It becomes meaningful. It becomes a choice. It becomes the kind of warmth that people remember and protect, rather than take for granted and exhaust. The reclaiming of voice happens not in one grand declaration, but in a sequence of small, consistent acts of honesty. It happens when you say, for the first time, "I disagree with that," without immediately apologizing for disagreeing. It happens when you allow a pause to exist, rather than filling it with reassurance. It happens when you accept that someone is temporarily disappointed in you without reorganizing your entire reality to make them comfortable again. These small moments accumulate into a new identity, not a constructed persona, not a strategic presentation, but the genuine emergence of a self that was always present underneath the performance. Machiavelli wrote that it is better to act and repent than to refrain and repent. In the context of reclaiming your authentic presence in the world, this translates to a willingness to risk the discomfort of visibility, to speak when silence would be safer, to hold when yielding would be easier, to stay present in your own life even when the habit of disappearing into accommodation calls to you with the familiar comfort of the known. Repentance in this framework is not moral judgment. It is simply the honest acknowledgement that an action did not produce the desired result. And the person who acts and learns lives a fundamentally different life than the person who refrains and wonders forever what might have happened if they had chosen differently. Your voice, once reclaimed, will not sound the way you fear it will. It will not be sharp or unkind. It will not drive people away or create the devastation that the polite person has always imagined lay just beyond the boundary of accommodation. What it will be is true, and truth, even when uncomfortable, carries within it a quality that people recognize and respond to in ways that no performance ever can. Machiavelli served the Medici and wrote for posterity, not because he was trying to please anyone in particular, but because he was trying to tell the truth about something he understood deeply. That truth has endured for 5 centuries, not because it was flattering, but because it was real. Your truth, however small or local, has the same potential to endure, to matter, and to finally give you the life that excessive politeness has been quietly preventing. Machiavelli's political philosophy contains, at its center, a profound hope. The hope that those who study the nature of power honestly can learn to navigate it without being destroyed by it. His writing was not a manual for tyrants. It was a survival guide for anyone who wished to move through a complex world with both their effectiveness and their dignity intact. The person who completes this journey, who moves from chronic accommodation to genuine self-possession, does not become a different person. They become more fully the person they always were, underneath the weight of a habit they never consciously chose. The relationships that remain after this transformation are extraordinary compared to what existed before. They are relationships between actual people rather than between a person and a role. When someone chooses to remain in your life after discovering that you have limits, after encountering the version of you that occasionally says no, after experiencing the disappointment of not receiving everything they once expected from you, that person is offering something genuine. Their presence is a choice rather than a convenience. And a friendship, a partnership, a love that is chosen freely is worth immeasurably more than one maintained through the other person's comfortable assumption of your infinite availability. Machiavelli understood that the prince's greatest achievement was not victory in battle, but the construction of a stable and enduring state, something that would outlast the immediate moment of triumph and continue to generate prosperity and order long after the intensity of the founding had faded. The stable state within a person's own life has a similar architecture. It is built not through isolated moments of courageous boundary setting, but through the consistent development of a self-knowledge so deep and a self-respect so grounded that the choices consistent with dignity become, over time, the natural and effortless default. There is also the matter of what becomes available to you when you are no longer spending so much energy on accommodation. The mental and emotional resources that were consumed by the constant monitoring of others' moods, the constant anticipation of potential conflict, the constant management of your self-presentation for maximum approval. These resources return to you. They become available for creation, for genuine connection, for the pursuit of the things that actually matter to you. People who have undergone this transformation often report something that sounds almost mystical, the sense that there is suddenly more time. Not because their days have grown longer, but because so much of what once consumed them has simply dissolved. Machiavelli closed The Prince with a call, not to violence, not to cynicism, but to the liberation of his beloved Italy through the application of intelligence, strength, and genuine self-knowledge by those with the courage to act. That call resonates across centuries because it touches something universal, the longing of the thinking person to live with full agency in a world that often seems designed to diminish it. You did not arrive at this video by accident. Something in you already knew what this content was pointing toward. Something that recognized itself in the description of the person who is too polite, too available, too careful to disturb, and somewhere underneath all of that, deeply, quietly, profoundly tired of the cost. The life on the other side of this transformation is not a life without kindness. It is a life where kindness is an expression of genuine generosity rather than a shield against conflict. It is a life where your yes means something because your no is also real. It is a life where the people around you are there because they want to be, rather than because they have discovered that being there costs them nothing. Machiavelli spent his life studying what makes a human being effective in the world, and his conclusion, disguised beneath the politics and the historical examples, was always the same. Know yourself, hold your ground, and move through the world as though your presence in it matters, because it does, and it always did. There is a moment, and if you have lived long enough inside the pattern described throughout this video, you will recognize it, when the accumulated weight of all the times you stayed quiet becomes heavier than the fear of speaking. That moment is not a breaking point. It is an arrival. It is the point at which the Machiavellian truth that has been circling you finally lands with its full force. The world was never waiting for you to be quieter, more accommodating, more careful about disturbing its comfort. The world was waiting for you to take up the space that was always yours to occupy. What Machiavelli understood about power and what this journey has asked you to consider about yourself is that dignity is not something given from outside. It cannot be earned through sufficient deference or awarded for outstanding accommodation. It is something that must be inhabited, chosen again and again in the small, unremarkable moments that together constitute a life. Every time you hear your own voice clearly and let it surface, every time you allow someone's disappointment to exist without making it your emergency, every time you hold the line, not in anger, but in the quiet certainty of a person who knows their own worth. In that moment, something in the world shifts, imperceptibly but irreversibly. The tragedy of excessive politeness is not the harm it allows others to do to you. The real tragedy is the version of yourself it prevents you from ever meeting. The person who moves through rooms differently, who attracts different quality of connection, who creates differently, loves differently, exists more fully. That person was never absent. They were waiting patiently beneath a mask you were given before you were old enough to question it. And the gift of this understanding is that the mask was never permanent. It was always just a habit. And habits, unlike character, can be changed with sufficient clarity and sufficient will. Machiavelli wrote, "For those who wish to understand the world as it is, rather than as they wished it to be." His philosophy is not comfortable, but it is honest. And within that honesty lives a form of compassion that transcends the easy warmth of empty reassurance. The most compassionate thing that can be said to a person who has spent years being walked over by the world is not that they deserved better treatment. They did, but that knowledge changes nothing. The most compassionate thing is this: the treatment you receive is a reflection not of your worth, which has never been in question, but of the instructions you have been sending. Change the instructions. The world is listening far more carefully than you ever believed. So here is the question that Machiavelli, in his Florentine study, surrounded by the ghosts of fallen empires and the memory of a city he loved too much to lie to, might ask of you now, not as a challenge, but as a genuine invitation into a harder and more rewarding way of being alive. How much longer will you be kind to everyone except yourself? If something in this video stirred something real in you, if you felt recognized, challenged, or quietly changed, then let that feeling move. Share this with someone who is living inside a politeness that is costing them more than they admit. Leave a word in the comments, not because the algorithm asks it of you, But because being part of a conversation about this matters, subscribe not out of habit, but because the work of becoming someone who takes up their rightful space deserves a companion. And know that the next time you are here, another layer will be waiting.